I never thought that the hand of my own child could tremble while passing me a cup of chamomile tea. The steam curled upward, carrying the faint scent of honey he'd stirred in. He always knew I preferred it plain, but lately he insisted on sweetening it, for my nerves. The porcelain was warm against my palms, almost comforting, but his eyes, they unsettled me. His smile was stretched too thin, like a badly stitched seam ready to burst. I sat there at the kitchen table, stroking the embroidered edge of the tablecloth, my mother's old handiwork, yellowed but sturdy, and I thanked him with the soft gratitude a mother is trained to give. He nodded, too quickly, brushing at a lock of hair that always fell into his face. "Long day," he muttered, blaming the tremor in his hands on fatigue. But I knew better. I had seen too much in this life to be fooled by excuses that fragile. Just the night before, while folding laundry in his room, yes, at my age, I still fold my son's shirts, I had opened the wrong drawer. I wasn't snooping. My fingers had simply stumbled upon a crisp envelope with his name neatly typed on it. The smell of paper and ink hit me before I realized what it was. A policy. A life insurance policy. On me. $750,000. Enough to buy him freedom, enough to make my absence convenient. Without telling me, without even the courtesy of conversation. My stomach had turned sour, as though I had swallowed vinegar, and yet I kept my face neutral. I slipped the envelope back exactly as I had found it, smoothing the edge so it wouldn't betray me. That night, I slept with the blanket pulled tight up to my chin, listening to the old clock tick, every second feeling like a countdown. Now, in the kitchen, I lifted the cup toward my lips, watching his eyes flicker with something I couldn't name. Not tenderness, not worry, something sharper, a spark of anticipation. My heart thudded. I tilted the cup, let the steam fog my glasses, and only pretended to sip. The liquid brushed my lips but did not pass them. When he excused himself to take a call, I moved quickly. From my pocket, I pulled the tiny perfume vial I'd emptied earlier that afternoon. The glass was delicate, cold against my fingers. I tipped the tea inside, drop by careful drop, until the cup was empty. The faint scent of my old lavender perfume clung to it, mixing oddly with the herbal aroma. My hands didn't shake, not yet. I replaced the cup on the saucer, spoon resting neatly across it, as though nothing had happened. He returned, smiling that hollow smile. "Finished it already? Good." His relief was too easy, too careless. I only nodded. Later that night, when the house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator, I held that vial under the lamplight of my room. The tea glowed faintly golden inside, innocent to the eye. I touched the glass to my cheek. It was cool, almost mocking. My breath slowed, heavy as lead in my chest. I didn't know what exactly had been in that cup, but I knew one thing with certainty. Whatever truth hid in that golden liquid was darker than any nightmare I could have imagined. And when I discovered it, my blood ran cold. I pretended to weaken that night, rubbing my temples and groaning softly, just to watch his reaction. The living room smelled faintly of lemon polish. He'd wiped the coffee table earlier, almost obsessively, like guilt could be scrubbed away. I leaned back in my chair, letting my eyelids droop, while the knitted throw I always kept on the armrest slipped over my knees. My hands played with its fringe, twisting and untwisting the yarn, a nervous gesture I couldn't stop. He watched me closely, eyes sharp under the glow of the television. When I sighed, pressing my fingers to my forehead as though dizzy, his lips twitched into something that wasn't quite a smile. His pupils dilated, not with fear, but with something close to expectation. I could feel it, like a current in the air. "Mom," he said softly, leaning forward, "you okay?" The words were right, but the tone was wrong. Hollow, almost rehearsed. I murmured, "Just a bit tired." And I closed my eyes. Not to sleep, but to listen. His chair creaked as he stood. I caught the faint scent of his aftershave, cedar and spice, moving down the hall. My ears strained, every nerve alive, as I heard the muffled scrape of his phone sliding from his pocket. His voice was low, but the walls of this house are old, thin like the skin on the back of my hands. No, he whispered, almost impatient. She drank it. Shouldn't be long now. My heart stopped for a beat. The blanket over my knees suddenly felt like a shroud. He was talking about me. My son. My only child. The one whose first steps I had clapped for, whose school projects I had stayed up late helping with, the boy I had once kissed goodnight 1,000 times. That same boy was whispering about my death as casually as if he were ordering groceries. I wanted to leap up, to scream, to confront him right there. But instead, I lay still, forcing my breathing to stay even. I dug my fingernails into the fabric of the blanket, the rough yarn biting back, anchoring me to the chair. My chest felt heavy, but not from poison, no, from betrayal. When he ended the call, his footsteps returned. He peeked into the room, his silhouette framed in the doorway. "Rest, Mom," he said, the fake smile painted back onto his face. "I'll check on you in the morning." I mumbled something vague and turned my head to the side, hiding my eyes. He seemed satisfied. His footsteps faded toward his room, the soft thud of his door closing echoing like a verdict. Only then did I open my eyes again. The shadows seemed darker, heavier. The house smelled of dust and old wood, scents I had always loved, but now they felt suffocating. I clutched the blanket to my chest, rocking slightly, as if that motion could calm me. This wasn't a mystery show on television. It wasn't a crime novel to close at night. This was my life. My son was planning my death, and he thought I was too old, too slow, too trusting to notice. He was wrong. My husband's death had left a silence in the house, and Mark filled it at first with kindness, until kindness turned into control. It's been 5 years since Richard passed. Cancer, the kind that creeps and spreads until you're left watching the person you love fade away, piece by piece. Even now, I can smell the faint tang of antiseptic when I remember those hospital rooms, the cold vinyl chairs, the hum of machines. Richard's old wool cardigan still hangs in my closet. Sometimes I press my face into it and breathe in what little of him remains. That cardigan has become my relic, my anchor. When he died, we thought it best to put the house in Mark's name. A practical decision, everyone said. He was young, stable, already settled into his career. The agreement was simple. I would live with him as long as I needed, no rent, no questions. At the time, it felt like security. A son protecting his mother. And in the beginning, it was. He cooked for me. He drove me to doctor's appointments, his hand steady on the wheel, his voice gentle as he asked if I was comfortable. He even sat with me at church, though faith was never really his thing. Those first months after Richard's death, I thought maybe Mark had grown into the man his father always hoped he'd be. But slowly, things began to shift. He started locking the medicine cabinet, claimed he was keeping things organized. He tossed little comments around at family gatherings, laughing about my forgetfulness, as though senility was already gnawing at me. At first, I chuckled along, smoothing the hem of my blouse to hide the sting. But each joke was another brick in the wall he was building around me. Then came the day he took my car keys. "Mom, you're a danger on the road," he said, standing in the kitchen doorway with that condescending tilt of his head. I still remember the taste of burnt toast on my tongue that morning, how I couldn't swallow past the lump in my throat. Driving was freedom, and he took it without asking, without discussion. I told myself he was worried. That grief had made him overprotective. That a son who had just lost his father was clinging too tightly to his mother. But deep down, in the quiet hours of night when I sat by the window watching the moonlight trace the garden path, doubt whispered to me. Now, with the vial of tea hidden away and the memory of his whispered phone call clawing at my chest, I realized the truth. His control hadn't been born from love, it had been born from planning. Every locked cabinet, every cruel joke, every stripped piece of independence, it was groundwork. A slow erosion of my strength. Mark wasn't just worried about me. He was preparing me. When I finally told Miriam, her voice carried both shock and steel, and for the first time in days, I felt less alone. That night, after pretending to sip another one of Mark's concoctions, I slipped into my bedroom and dialed Miriam's number. My fingers shook against the old rotary-style phone I still keep, its cord twisted like the tangled thoughts in my head. When her voice came through, warm and scratchy with age, I nearly cried. "Miriam," I whispered, as though the walls themselves might betray me, "I need you." The lavender sachet in my drawer filled the room with its calming scent, but my heart still raced like a trapped bird. I told her everything: the vial, the whispers, the insurance policy. Each word tasted bitter, but letting them out felt like unclenching a fist I'd been holding for too long. There was a long pause. Then, with that calm authority she'd always had, she once taught Sunday school, and her scolding alone could tame a room full of children, she said, "Don't worry, honey. Bring me the vial tomorrow morning. My grandson's in forensics, and you know I still volunteer at the lab. We'll make sure it gets tested." I pressed the receiver tighter to my ear, as if I could climb inside her steadiness. The knitted shawl around my shoulders slid down, and I clutched it back against me like armor. "Miriam," I breathed, "do you believe me?" Her laugh came soft but sure. "Of course I do. Who else knows your son better than me? I've seen that boy since diapers. If you say something's wrong, I trust you." Her words washed over me like a warm bath, easing muscles I hadn't realized were locked. For days, I had doubted myself, had wondered if grief, or age, or paranoia had tricked me. But hearing her certainty lit a spark in my chest. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining things. I had a witness now, an ally. "Bring me the vial," she repeated, firm. "Tomorrow morning. First thing." When I hung up, I sat in the dim glow of my bedside lamp, stroking the rim of the tiny glass vial hidden in my nightstand. The tea inside shimmered faintly, a golden trap captured and waiting. For the first time since this nightmare began, I allowed myself to exhale. If Miriam could prove what I suspected, then maybe, just maybe, I wasn't as powerless as Mark thought. I tucked the shawl tighter around me, my eyes fixed on the vial like it was a candle flame in the dark. For the first time in weeks, I let myself hope. I slipped out the next morning with the vial hidden in my pocket, knowing that each step away from the house was a step toward truth. Mark was waiting in the kitchen when I came downstairs, the smell of bacon and eggs thick in the air. He rarely cooked such breakfasts for me anymore, which made the gesture feel suspicious rather than loving. My stomach turned at the sight of the plate he slid in front of me, eggs gleaming too yellow, bacon too perfectly crisp. I forced a smile, smoothing the cuffs of my cardigan the way I always did when I needed composure. "Eat while it's hot," he urged, his eyes watching too closely. "I'm not very hungry this morning," I said lightly, pushing the food around with my fork. "Just a piece of toast will do." My voice carried the careful cheer of a mother avoiding confrontation. He frowned, then brightened suddenly. "Don't forget your vitamins." He placed the little cup of pills beside me, his hand lingering there a second too long. The sound of them rattling against the glass dish echoed louder than it should have. I nodded, pocketing them when he turned away. "I'll just take a quick walk to the corner store for some bread," I said. "We're out." He gave me a puzzled look. "I can go later." "No need. The exercise will do me good." I wrapped my scarf tightly around my neck, the knitted threads smelling faintly of cedar from my closet. My heart pounded with each word, but my face stayed calm. Outside, the morning air was sharp with the smell of autumn leaves, a briskness that filled my lungs with courage. My shoes crunched on the sidewalk, and I kept glancing back until I was sure Mark wasn't following. 2 blocks down, beneath the tall oak tree where the roots cracked the pavement, Miriam stood waiting. Her figure was small, wrapped in her familiar quilted coat, but her presence filled me with strength. The moment she saw me, she opened her arms. We hugged, and I pressed my face into her shoulder, inhaling the faint scent of lavender soap. For just a moment, I felt like a girl again, leaning on the only friend who could always be trusted. "You brought it?" she asked softly, her eyes sharp with purpose. I nodded and pulled the tiny perfume vial from my pocket. The glass glimmered in the weak sunlight, the golden liquid swirling like a secret begging to be told. I placed it in her hand as though it were a holy relic. She closed her fingers around it and looked at me squarely. "You trust me? With my life," I whispered. The words trembled on my tongue, but they were true. My whole life might very well depend on her now. She slipped the vial into her bag, tucking it deep under her knitting yarn. "Go home," she said. "Act normal. I'll handle this." I wanted to cling to her, to walk with her all the way to the lab, but I knew I couldn't risk it. Instead, I nodded, squeezing her hand one last time. Her rings pressed into my skin, leaving little impressions that felt like a seal of protection. As I turned back toward the house, I caught my reflection in a shop window, scarf neat, hair pinned back, shoulders straight. To anyone else, I was just an older woman running errands. But inside, my chest thundered like a drum. The vial was gone from my pocket, but for the first time, I didn't feel empty. I felt armed. At the library that afternoon, I searched for answers in books and articles, as though wisdom could shield me from what I already knew in my bones. The building smelled of old paper and dust, a perfume I'd always loved. Each breath reminded me of years spent reading bedtime stories to Mark, his small body curled against me, his little hand clutching the corner of a blanket while I turned the pages. That memory should have brought comfort. Instead, it felt like a cruel contrast to the man he had become. I settled at a table tucked in the far corner, where the light was dim and the air cooler. The chair creaked as I lowered myself into it, my hands smoothing the front of my blouse again and again. A nervous ritual. My eyes scanned the titles on the glowing computer screen: elder abuse cases, covert poisoning, manipulation by caregivers. Each headline made my stomach twist. I clicked through articles written by experts who described patterns almost identical to mine: a son or daughter slowly taking control, cutting off independence, whispering about dementia. My fingers trembled against the keyboard. Every sentence I read was another nail in the coffin of denial. One article described how sedatives, when mixed with existing medications, could mimic natural decline. Lethargy, confusion, memory lapses. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. I rubbed them quickly, pretending to myself I was only tired. Was I next? Was that really his plan, my own son? The library was so silent I could hear the ticking of the clock above the reference desk. Each second seemed to echo the same haunting question: why? Money, of course. That fat life insurance policy. 750,000 reasons for him to speed up my exit. But was it only money? Or was there resentment too? Years of me mothering him, of me insisting on standards, of me refusing to let him grow lazy? I thought of Richard's old cardigan again, folded neatly in my closet. My husband had always said, "Mark needs discipline, or he'll find trouble on his own." I used to scold Richard for being too hard on the boy. And now? Now I wondered if Richard had seen something in his son I had refused to see. I closed the browser, my reflection faintly visible on the darkened screen. My face looked older than I remembered, the lines sharper, the eyes hollowed. But there was still fire there. Still life. On the desk beside me sat my leather-bound journal, its spine cracked from years of use. I touched the cover, tracing the indentations with my finger. I'd begun filling its pages with notes, suspicions, times, dates. It felt less like a diary now and more like a shield. The biggest question, however, clawed at my brain, refusing to let go: why would my own son want me gone? Was it only money, or was it something darker? Something personal? The silence of the library had no answer for me, only the faint rustle of a librarian shelving books somewhere down the aisle. I closed my journal with a firm snap and slipped it into my bag. If I wanted the truth, I'd have to dig deeper, and this time, I would not stop until I found it. Once I accepted the truth, I began preparing quietly, every gesture calculated, every note written as if my life depended on it, because it did. The house smelled faintly of lemon cleaner again that morning. Mark had started scrubbing more often, almost compulsively. Guilt leaves its traces, I suppose, and he tried to polish them away. I sat at the kitchen table with my cup of plain black tea, brewed by me, watched by me, and opened my leather journal. The pages were already thick with ink, each entry a small act of rebellion. Tuesday, 9:45 a.m., I wrote, the pen scratching steadily across the paper. He placed the vitamins by my plate again. Watched too closely while I pretended to swallow. I wrote it all down, what he said, what he cooked, even the tone of his voice when he called me, Mom. The habit of writing steadied me. My fingers traced the ribbon bookmark as though it were a lifeline. And in truth, it was. That afternoon, when Mark left for errands, I pulled out the small nanny cam I had ordered weeks ago, one of those discreet devices shaped like a motion sensor. My palms sweated as I fixed it high in the hallway, facing the kitchen and living room. The smell of the adhesive backing clung to my hands, sharp and chemical. When he returned, I gestured toward it. I thought it might make us feel safer, I said lightly, smoothing the hem of my blouse. With all the burglaries in the neighborhood. He laughed nervously, the sound too thin. Good idea, he said, but his eyes lingered on the little lens longer than they should have. At night, under the glow of my bedside lamp, I emailed scanned copies of my journal pages to Miriam's granddaughter. She was in law school, young, sharp, full of energy I no longer had. Keep these safe, I wrote. Don't ask questions yet. Just trust me. The whoosh of the email sending gave me a strange comfort, like dispatching soldiers into the night. I began a ritual too. Each evening, I brewed myself a chamomile tea. A genuine one, untouched by his hands. I sipped it slowly, letting the warmth spread through me, and watched him watching me. His eyes always softened, thinking I was playing into his game. He didn't know I had begun my own. And sometimes, when he wasn't looking, I pressed Richard's old cardigan against my face and whispered, I'm not finished yet. The smell of wool and faint tobacco lingered there, reminding me of strength, of stubbornness, of survival. Every interaction became evidence. Every word he spoke became a thread in the rope he was tying around his own neck. And I, patient, careful, deliberate, was the one keeping track. He thought I was weak. He thought I was fading. But I was writing, watching, preparing, and when the time came, I would make sure the truth was louder than any lie he could tell. The call from Miriam came 3 days later, and the truth in her trembling voice nearly knocked the breath out of me. I was folding laundry in the den, the faint scent of fabric softener clinging to Richard's old cardigan that I still washed though I rarely wore. My fingers smoothed the sleeves as if smoothing out time itself. The phone rang then, its shrill tone slicing the quiet. I picked it up, my pulse already racing, as though my body knew before my mind. Miriam? I whispered. Her voice quivered. They tested the vial, honey. It wasn't just tea. The room tilted slightly, the basket of clean linens blurring in my vision. What was it? Traces of a sedative, a powerful one, and when mixed with your heart medication. Her words cracked, like glass under pressure. It could slow your heart to a crawl. To anyone else, it would look like natural causes. I sank into the old armchair by the window, the upholstery scratchy under my palms. The weight of her words pressed on my chest until I struggled to draw breath. For a moment, I thought perhaps the sedative had already found me, that my heart had slowed, that it would stop altogether. But no, it wasn't the drug this time. It was fear. It was betrayal crystallized into a physical ache. Miriam spoke again, steadier now. You're not imagining this. You're not paranoid. He's trying to kill you. The words hit harder than any slap. My son, my flesh, my blood, was planning my death. Not in anger, not in a fit of madness, but with patience, calculation, and paperwork filed neatly in some insurance office. My hand gripped the locket around my neck, the one Richard gave me on our 15th anniversary. I opened it by reflex, gazing at the tiny photo of us smiling on a windy beach, our hair wild with salt air. What do I do, Miriam? My voice cracked like a child's. You stay calm. You keep documenting. And you don't let him know you know. The The smell of rain began to drift in through the open window, fresh, metallic, almost electric. A storm was coming, both outside and in my home. I closed the locket, the click sounding final. "Thank you," I whispered. My throat was dry, as if I had swallowed ash. When I hung up, I stared out at the garden where Mark used to play with his toy trucks, the earth still scarred by old tire tracks he once dug into the dirt. How could that boy, the boy who once brought me dandelions in his fists, become the man who laced my tea with poison? I pressed Richard's cardigan to my face again, inhaling wool and memory, fighting the sob rising in my throat. It was real, all of it. No more excuses, no more denial. My son was not protecting me. He was dismantling me, one cup at a time. And now, I was the only one who knew. I began faking the symptoms, letting him believe his plan was working, while inside me burned a fury he would never see. That evening, the house smelled faintly of roasted chicken, his attempt at comfort food. The meat was too dry, and I chewed slowly, swallowing with effort. I made sure to sigh afterward, pressing my hand against my chest as if weary. My shawl slipped from my shoulders, and I let it, as though even fabric weighed too much for me now. "Mom?" he asked, his voice tight with feigned concern. "You all right?" I forced a tremble into my fingers as I reached for my water glass. The coolness of it grounded me. "Just tired, darling. Forgetful too." I let my eyes dart vaguely toward the television, as though I couldn't remember what I'd been watching. His gaze sharpened, and for a moment, I saw it, eagerness flickering like a spark behind his eyes. He quickly masked it with a sigh, but I had already caught it. Later, he brought me another cup of tea. The steam curled up in front of his face, fogging his glasses. He held it out like an offering. "Maybe it's time we talked about care homes," he said gently. Too gently. I took the cup, my hands steady though I forced them to tremble. "A care home?" I echoed. My voice cracked in just the right way. "You deserve rest," he continued, settling into the armchair across from me. His hands rubbed against his knees, restless. "Professional care. People who understand your decline." Decline. The word tasted like rust in my mouth. I nodded slowly, pretending to sip. The porcelain pressed cool against my lips, but the liquid never passed. "You're right, Mark," I murmured, lowering the cup. "Maybe it is time." Inside, I was screaming. Every muscle in me wanted to hurl the cup across the room, to shout that I knew, that I had proof. But outwardly, I only smoothed the hem of my blouse, the same nervous gesture I'd done for months, letting him think it was all unraveling. He leaned back, satisfied. His shoulders relaxed, his smile faint but triumphant. He thought he had me where he wanted me, tired, compliant, resigned. That night, when he finally retreated to his room, I set the untouched tea on the counter. I watched the steam fade, watched the cup grow cold. My reflection in the darkened kitchen window stared back at me, eyes sharper than I'd seen them in years. I whispered to the empty room, "Not yet, Mark. Not yet." The tea sat there like a trap, silent and golden, but I was the one setting it now. That night, I overheard him again, and the truth of his long game chilled me more than the poison ever could. The house was wrapped in silence, the kind that makes every creak sound like a gunshot. I lay in bed with Richard's cardigan across my lap, stroking the worn buttons the way one might hold onto prayer beads. My lamp was off, but my eyes stayed open. My ears strained, sharp as they'd been when Mark was a baby and I could hear his whimper through 3 closed doors. Around midnight, his footsteps passed my room. Light, careful, too careful. The floorboards gave him away all the same. Then came the muffled click of his phone lighting up, a faint glow slipping under his bedroom door. I shifted closer, pressing my cheek against the cool wood of the wall. The wallpaper smelled faintly of dust and age, but I didn't care. I had to hear. His voice was low, conspiratorial. "No, not yet. She's still alert. But the sedatives are building up. It'll look natural." The words sliced through me. My nails dug into the sleeve of Richard's cardigan until the wool scratched my skin. He wasn't just slipping something in occasionally. He was dosing me in increments, slowly, methodically, letting it accumulate until I seemed frail, confused, and ready for the grave. A slow death, dressed up as age. I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from gasping, the metallic tang of blood spreading across my tongue. The taste anchored me in the moment, kept me quiet when every part of me wanted to storm into his room and slap the phone from his hand. Instead, I listened. He paused, then added, "It won't be long. The doctor already thinks she's declining. This way, no questions." His voice carried a hint of pride, as if he were presenting a school project, not plotting his mother's funeral. When he ended the call, silence rushed back into the hall. I lay there, stiff under my blanket, every heartbeat pounding against my ribs like fists on a locked door. So that was his plan, not a single cup, not a dramatic collapse, but a slow erasure of me. A careful weaving of lies and symptoms until I disappeared into the story he had written. Senile, weak, ready to die, but he had forgotten something important. I was still here. My mind was sharp. My ears worked just fine. And I had seen his hand. I turned onto my back, staring at the ceiling where the moonlight carved silver patterns across the plaster. The cardigan lay heavy on my chest, carrying the ghost of Richard's scent. I whispered into the dark, "He thinks I'm fading. But he doesn't know I'm watching." The storm outside began to rattle the windows, thunder rolling in the distance. I closed my eyes, letting the sound settle into me. It felt like a promise, like the sky itself was readying for a reckoning. Mark believed he was playing chess with an old woman too tired to notice. But I was about to show him just how wrong he was. That night, lying awake in the storm's echo, fear left me. What took its place was fire, hot, steady, unrelenting. I had spent weeks watching, recording, pretending. At first, the act of playing weak felt like self-preservation, but now I realized it was more than survival. It was strategy. My shawl, always slipping from my shoulders, had become a costume, my feigned forgetfulness, a weapon sharper than any blade. As I stroked the edge of Richard's cardigan, I thought about the years I had given to Mark. The sleepless nights, rocking him while his colicky cries filled our small apartment. The peanut butter sandwiches I packed, even when money was so tight that I skipped meals myself. The endless hours at the sewing machine, mending his jeans because buying new ones was a luxury. And here he was, plotting my death like I was nothing but an obstacle. Rage swelled inside me, not the frantic kind, but the deep, steady kind that comes from betrayal too sharp to be ignored. It felt almost clean, like the moment you stop scrubbing at a stain and decide instead to burn the cloth. I sat up in bed, the blanket slipping into my lap. My breath fogged the cool air, and I touched the locket at my throat. Richard's picture smiled back at me when I flipped it open. "I won't go quietly," I whispered. My voice was steady, even, as though Richard himself was lending me his strength. The house around me smelled faintly of damp wood from the storm outside. I inhaled deeply, letting the scent ground me, reminding me of all the winters I had survived here. This house had seen joy, loss, rebuilding. It would not see me destroyed by the very son I had raised under its roof. Mark believed I was fragile, dependent. He underestimated the resilience that comes only from decades of living, from burying a husband, from enduring life's cruelties and still standing. I smoothed my blouse, the familiar gesture suddenly transformed. It was no longer nervousness. It was armor. For the first time in weeks, I did not feel like prey. I felt like a hunter. The fire inside me whispered of justice, not vengeance. I would not harm him. I would not scream or fight. But I would dismantle his plan piece by piece until the world saw him for what he was. And when they did, I would be standing, head high, eyes clear, while he faced the ruin he had built with his own hands. I pulled the cardigan tighter around my shoulders and lay back, not to sleep but to plot. My mind, sharper than it had been in years, traced each step of my evidence, each move I had left to make. He thought I was already half gone. But I was about to prove that I was more alive, more dangerous, than he could ever imagine. Once the fire was lit inside me, every step became deliberate. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was building a case, brick by brick, until the walls closed in on him. The next morning, sunlight slanted weakly through the curtains, catching the dust motes in its path. I sat at the kitchen table, journal open, pen poised. The smell of toast lingered in the air, though I hadn't eaten. Hunger was a nuisance, documentation was more important. When Mark left for work, I retrieved the small box I kept hidden in the linen closet, my secret chest of evidence. Inside were memory cards from the nanny cam, slips of paper with times and dates, even one of the untouched vitamin capsules he had placed on my plate. I tucked everything neatly into a manila envelope, labeling it in my neatest handwriting. Property of E.M. Carter. My name, my proof, my fight. Then I called Miriam's granddaughter, Rachel. She was 28, clever as a whip, and already clerking at a law firm. Her voice, brisk but warm, answered on the second ring. "Rachel," I said, lowering my voice though the house was empty, "it's time." She didn't hesitate. "Bring me what you have. We'll prepare a formal letter. Evidence attached." That afternoon, wrapped in Richard's cardigan, I sat at her dining table while she typed. The smell of fresh coffee filled the room, and I sipped slowly, grateful for a drink I knew was safe. She moved quickly, her fingers clattering across the keyboard like a typewriter. Every word she typed was another nail in Mark's coffin. We included everything: the toxicology report from the vial, copies of my journal, still images from the nanny cam of Mark hovering too closely over my meals. Rachel's sharp eyes flicked up at me. "This is solid. More than solid." Her printer hummed, spitting out pages that smelled faintly of ink and heat. She clipped them neatly, slid them into 3 separate envelopes. One goes to the insurance company. One to the police. One to the Elder Protection Agency. Redundancy is safety. I nodded, smoothing my blouse, my chest tight but proud. For the first time, I felt not like prey but like a strategist. When I returned home, Mark was already in the kitchen. "There you are," he said, his voice just a shade too sharp. "Out running errands?" "Yes," I replied, smiling faintly. "Just errands." I moved past him to the stove, lifted the kettle, and set it to boil. The hiss of steam rose, filling the air. This time, I prepared the tea myself, measuring the leaves, pouring the water, letting the chamomile bloom golden. I stirred it slowly, the spoon clinking softly against the cup. Then I turned, carrying it to him. "Here," I said sweetly, offering the cup. "For you." He blinked, startled. His hand trembled as he took it. "For me?" "Yes. You've done so much for me lately. You deserve it." I smiled, wide and calm, as the steam fogged his glasses. And for the first time, I saw fear flicker in his eyes. 2 days later, the knock at the door turned our quiet driveway into a stage, and Mark into a man stripped bare. I had been sitting by the window in the front room, my shawl wrapped tight, my journal open in my lap. The morning smelled of brewed coffee and cut grass from a neighbor's mower. Ordinary scents, almost cheerful, but my chest buzzed with anticipation. I knew something was coming. At precisely 10 o'clock, a patrol car pulled into the driveway. Sunlight glinted off its windshield, and I saw Mark pause mid-step on the porch with the mail still in his hand. His face paled even before the officer stepped out. "Mr. Carter?" the officer asked, holding a folder thick with papers. Mark's voice cracked. "Yes?" The officer extended the documents, his expression unreadable. "You've been served." I leaned slightly closer to the window, careful not to be obvious, though my heart hammered against my ribs. Mark's hand shook as he accepted the papers. He flipped through the first few pages, color draining from his cheeks. His lips moved silently, reading words that sealed his fate: toxicology, insurance fraud, elder abuse. Then he looked up, straight at me. Our eyes locked through the glass. I didn't flinch. Instead, I lifted my teacup slowly, deliberately. I held it just beneath my lips, close enough for him to see the steam rise. But I didn't sip. I simply stared. His face twisted, first confusion, then dawning horror. He knew, in that instant, that I knew everything. That his careful game, his months of planning, had crumbled in my hands. I watched him exhale sharply, the papers trembling in his grip. His shoulders sagged as if the weight of his lies had finally landed. The officer said something more, but I barely heard it. All I could see was my son standing in the sunlight, stripped of his masks, finally exposed. When he turned to glance back at the house once more, I gave him the faintest smile. Not of triumph, not of cruelty, but of finality. And in that silence between us, mother and son, betrayer and betrayed, I felt the strangest calm. The tea cooled in my hands, untouched, while outside, the man I had raised stood trembling under the weight of his own choices. The moment the officer drove away, Mark stormed into the house, and for the first time, his mask dropped completely. The slam of the front door rattled the old picture frames on the wall. I sat in the armchair by the window, shawl wrapped around me, my teacup resting on the table. The air still smelled faintly of cut grass from outside, but now it mixed with the acrid tang of his cologne, sharper, heavier than usual, as though sweat had soured it. His footsteps thundered across the wooden floor. He burst into the room, face red, papers still crumpled in his hand. "You think you can ruin my life?" he shouted, voice cracking with rage. I looked up at him calmly, smoothing the hem of my blouse as though brushing dust away. "No," I said evenly. "You already did that yourself." The words landed. His eyes widened, then narrowed, fury swelling in their depths. He threw the papers onto the coffee table, they scattered like leaves in a storm. "You ungrateful, after everything I've done for you." I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I folded my hands neatly in my lap. Cooking my food, locking away my medicine, planning my death. "Yes, Mark, you've done so very much for me." My tone was dry, sharp as broken glass. He lunged forward suddenly, reaching for the phone on the table. I had already prepared for that. My thumb pressed the emergency button I had installed just days before. The device let out a sharp tone, barely audible to him but enough to signal the call had gone through. "The police are already on their way," I said softly, my voice steady despite the racing of my heart. His hands shook, the same tremor I'd seen the night he first brought me that poisoned tea. Only now, it wasn't guilt or nerves. It was fear. "You'll regret this," he hissed, but the words lacked conviction. His chest rose and fell too fast, his breathing ragged. He knew the net had closed around him. I leaned back in the chair, adjusting my shawl like a queen on her throne. "No, Mark. I won't regret saving my own life. I regret raising a son who thought he could steal it." Silence stretched between us, heavy, broken only by the distant sound of sirens growing closer. He stood there, fists clenching and unclenching, his body trembling with a storm he could no longer control. I remained seated, calm, my fingers curled lightly around the edge of my teacup. The ceramic felt cool now, solid, real. For years, I had feared losing control. Tonight, it was his turn. And I would make sure the world saw the truth. In the courtroom, with the air heavy as stone, I faced my son not as a mother, but as the witness to his betrayal. The benches smelled faintly of polish and age, the same scent as old pews in church. I sat upright, my shawl draped neatly over my shoulders, smoothing the fringe as if to steady myself. My locket rested against my collarbone, cool and reassuring. Around me, murmurs buzzed like bees in a hive until the gavel struck, silencing everything. Mark sat across the room, flanked by his lawyer. His suit was wrinkled, his tie askew, as though even fabric itself refused to cooperate with him. He looked at me once, quickly, then turned away. His hands twisted in his lap, the same hands that once reached for mine as a boy crossing the street. Now, they were the hands that measured sedatives against my medications on a spreadsheet. The prosecution laid out the evidence. Bottles of pills found in his dresser. Handwritten notes, calculations of dosages, times, side effects. Pages from my journal, entered into record, my words in black ink now bound by the authority of law. Still images from the nanny cam projected on the screen, showing him hovering by my tea, his back hunched in guilty concentration. His lawyer objected, sputtered, tried to argue I was confused, forgetful, paranoid with grief. But the toxicology report silenced him. Forensics doesn't lie. The numbers glared back from the page like a verdict already written. When it was my turn to speak, I stood slowly, pressing my hand to the polished wood of the witness stand. The smell of varnish mingled with the faint perfume of the woman beside me, lavender, like Miriam's soap. It steadied me. I looked directly at Mark. My voice was clear, firmer than it had been in years. "You wanted me gone for money," I said. The words carried across the silent courtroom. "You thought my age made me weak, that my love made me blind. But you forgot one thing. I raised you. I know how you think. And I saw what you did." He shifted in his seat, jaw tightening, but he couldn't meet my gaze. Turning back to the judge, I continued. "He didn't just plan to take my life. He planned to erase me, to make it look like age had done the work for him. He wanted me remembered not as I am, but as a woman who slipped away quietly." I lifted my chin. "But I am not quiet. I will not disappear. And now the truth is here for everyone to see." The courtroom remained still, the weight of my words hanging in the air. Mark's lawyer tried once more to protest, but the judge silenced him with a wave. All eyes had turned to my son. He sat there, pale and sweating, stripped of excuses. For the first time, I saw not my boy, not even a man, but a stranger, one who had nearly stolen everything I had left. And I knew then that whatever the sentence, my victory was already won. I was alive, and he was caught. When the gavel finally fell on his sentence, the sound was not an end but a beginning, the start of a life I would reclaim for myself. The judge's words echoed through the courtroom, sharp and final, 22 years. The number rang like a church bell, tolling for him, not for me. Around me, murmurs rose, but I stayed still, my shawl pulled snug, my hands folded in my lap. My heart beat steady, calmer than it had in months. Mark's head sank into his hands. The sight should have broken me, once, it might have. But as I looked at him, I felt no pity. Only clarity. Choices carve their own punishment, and he had carved his with meticulous care. When I returned home that evening, the house was silent. For the first time in years, it was mine. I ran my hand along the banister, polished smooth from decades of family touch. The smell of wood greeted me, old and familiar, not poisoned or corrupted. Just home. Days later, the paperwork arrived. The house was under my name again, legal and indisputable. I sat at the kitchen table, the very table where he had set cups of poisoned tea before me, and signed the deed with a steady hand. The pen scratched across the paper, a sound as sweet as birdsong. I spent the following weeks in quiet reordering. I updated my will, leaving no room for loopholes, no possibility for another betrayal. I set aside money for Miriam and for Rachel, whose courage and intelligence had saved me. And I donated a portion of my savings to organizations that fight elder abuse. I wanted other women like me to have the shield I almost didn't. The house itself seemed lighter. Curtains open, windows washed, air fresh with lavender from the sachets Miriam brought me. The kitchen smelled of real chamomile now, brewed by my own hand. When Miriam visited, she set her cup down beside mine. We sipped together, watching the steam curl like soft ribbons into the air. "You're stronger than you know," she told me, her voice thick with pride. I shook my head, smiling faintly. I just remembered who I've always been. At night, I wrapped myself in Richard's cardigan, sitting in the quiet glow of the lamp. The cardigan smelled faintly of cedar still, a reminder of steady hands and steady love. I whispered to the empty room, "I made it, Richard." I didn't let him win. For years, I thought age meant shrinking, giving up pieces of myself, little by little. But now I knew better. Age had given me steel. The kind of steel that bends but does not break. The world had tried to silence me with whispers of senility, with a son's false smile, with a cup of tea meant to end me. And yet here I was, alive, unbroken, and unafraid. I never thought my own son would be the one I needed protection from, but life has a way of revealing its sharpest edges where we least expect them. The days after the trial passed slowly, quietly. My house felt different, almost like it had exhaled after holding its breath too long. The air smelled of lemon and lavender, fresh and clean. No hidden poisons, no false smiles. Just me, my journal, and the ticking of the clock that had seen me through decades of joy and sorrow. Sometimes, when I sit in the kitchen with a cup of chamomile, brewed by my own hand, I think back to that first night when Mark's hand trembled as he offered me tea. The memory stings like a paper cut, small, sudden, but sharp enough to bleed. I still see his face sometimes, that hollow smile stretched too thin. I wonder if he ever thinks of me, or if prison walls have already hardened him beyond repair. But then I remind myself, his fate is his. Mine is mine. I've made new rituals. Each morning, I open my window wide, letting in the crisp air, the scent of wet grass or wood smoke depending on the season. I smooth the hem of my blouse out of habit, but it feels different now, not anxious, but grounding. A gesture of presence, of being here. Still here. I joined Miriam again at church. When we bow our heads in prayer, I feel her hand brush mine, a silent reminder that friendship can outlast even betrayal. Her grandson sometimes visits too, curious, respectful, asking me about the case, as if I'm some heroine from one of his forensic textbooks. I only laugh softly and tell him the truth. I was just a woman who paid attention. That, I realize, is the heart of it. Paying attention, trusting the instincts life has honed into us after decades of carrying others, of surviving storms. So many women my age doubt themselves, thinking every slip of memory is the beginning of decline. But sometimes, forgetfulness is not decay, it's a story someone else is trying to write for you. So I write my own. I fill my journal with not just fears now, but with joys. The smell of fresh bread I bake on Sundays. The sound of children laughing down the block. The touch of Richard's cardigan when I pull it close on cold nights. These are the details of a life no one could erase, no matter how carefully they planned. If there is anything I have learned, it is this: trust yourself. If you feel something is wrong, it probably is. Keep records. Find allies. Speak, even when others tell you you're imagining things. And never, ever, drink the tea unless you made it yourself. Because sometimes, the most dangerous thing in the room isn't the illness you fear, or the age you carry, or the silence pressing around you. Sometimes, it's the one who calls you, Mom.